So this question was asked of me, and I don't think I answered it correctly. So I have to re-answer it or clarify better. I said God was not the author of confusion. It's not. There's not going to be crazy things, or cause somebody asked me, well, is the Desert Fathers, are they kind of dangerous to read? And with the monastic writings that you touch the essence of the unknowable, and you go mad, like in some religious traditions. And I said no, and the answer is still no, except with the Desert Fathers and the monastic writings, the thing you have to understand is that they're for the monastics. And they're for very seasoned people. So, interacting with these things, you have to know that it was for a time and a place. And for most people, they're not in that time and place. And I don't know if I have the ladder of divine ascent, but my old parish priest would always give out, do I have the book? It's like a guide to reading the ladder of divine ascent. And I know people who've fallen asleep. Somebody said, I sat down with the ladder of divine ascent, I was going to read it, and I got, bundled up in a, like I put, this warm, like, blanket or something over me, and I sat in this really nice chair, and I had a cup of cocoa, and it was snowing outside, and I was reading. I started to read, and I fell asleep, and I think that's kind of a cool, cute story. The lady was very nice, and, very short, and she's saying this. I thought it was, funny. Like, oh, that's, that's cute. She was older than me. It's not like she's hot, okay? Because I know people are like, oh, you said she was, no. But with that, you kind of have to get into that understanding of what that means, or the relationship with these two things, because they're mystical. Like, a lot of the sayings will be like, what? Like, in the Tao Te Ching, you'll read things and it'll just be like, this isn't anything in there, but it's like, and the tree was there, so he understood, but yet he did not understand. It's like, what does that mean? But if you're a Taoist living in a bamboo forest, about 1,000 years ago, that might be very enlightening. I don't know the context of that, or the nuances of Chinese, or whatever, especially ancient Chinese, or any Chinese. You can draw some of the symbols, but that's about it. So it's wisdom for not this world. We're not in that world. If you're locked up, not monasticism, in the Illinois State Correctional Facilities, you will say, well, in here and then in the world, because it is two different existences. I'm not talking about parallel universes or anything. And on a place like Monathos or Skeet, which is where a lot of these writings come out from, I think they start at St. Anthony and go to St. Moses the Ethiopian, which a lot of people, it's kind of funny, they say that Moses was black, but it's because they're seeing Moses, Moses the strong, or Abba Moses the black, or Moses the Ethiopian. It's all the same names for the same guy. He was a very violent man, and he became a monastic, and people would come to see him, and he would try to hide from them. They'd come to him for wisdom, and because he didn't think he was worthy. And he'd be walking around the cells, and they'd say, well, we're looking for St. Moses. And he goes, you don't want to meet that wretched, wicked man. And then they'd say, well, what did Moses do that was wrong? And the other priest would say, no, he's a great monastic. And he said, well, this one guy, this guy said he was wicked. And they go, that's Moses. When his same band of raiders that used to rape, kill, murder, slaughter, steal, was coming to raid Skeet Monastery, the monks left, and they couldn't persuade him to leave. They said, no, you can still do stuff. He goes, no, those that live by the sword shall die by the sword. Quote from that Christ had said, and he sat there and he was killed by them. Well, I don't think they know that he was killed, but he was never seen from again or heard from. And I hope I find a tradition saying that these band of robbers then became holy men and helped out people in another place. I wish I could find something like that, but I believe he was killed. I think his relics were actually recovered, so no, that's impossible. That couldn't have happened. But it'd be cool if he did. So they're for a different discipline and a different style of living. Can some of them apply to a working mother who have children with special needs? Yes, some of them do, and some of them find great enlightenment. There's that Sufi saying. Well, it's actually not. I don't believe it's a Sufi saying. I mean, I've repeated it to people, and they said we use that in our church, and we use something very similar. I know a prayer that goes like that, and it says it's something around the lines of, Lord or God, if I seek heaven only for its glory and riches, may I never find it. If I seek you only to escape the terrors and the punishment of hell, may I be condemned from hell. If I seek after you just to be in your presence, please allow me to enter into your presence. Please grant me your presence. Something along that line. And if people say, oh, that's a great Sufi saying, and I'd know it if I heard it, but it's basically, that's it paraphrased. But that's in the Desert Fathers, and there's jewels of wisdom like that, but you have to navigate this very slowly. There's a young man who's coming, so I haven't talked to him in a while, and I feel horrible about, who's coming to Orthodoxy, and he's actually coming from an Eastern tradition that he was raised in, and it's much easier for him. It's much easier for the Buddhists and the Hindus to come into to Orthodoxy, I think, because it's a more even, natural flow, and then the worldview is very similar. And Buddhism and Orthodoxy have very similar worldviews, even though some of the consequences, and there are parts of it that are different, like the idea that the earth is getting better and the fulfillment and life is inherently good and existence is good, and the other one is bad. But the way of dealing with the world is extremely similar, and your relation to it is. He really wanted to dive into monastic stuff, and me and his parish priest said, no, please don't, just chillax on that, dude. No, I hate that word, so it's so silly I use it, it's just kind of, yeah, I always warn people, if you're coming to Orthodoxy, don't get into that stuff right away. I would say the Didache is very good to read, the Letters of Ignatius, and always, the greatest thing that we have, our greatest aid is in here. Sometimes you'll meet a very devout monastic, and I had problems with monastics for the longest time, even personal relationships with them. I did not like them. I thought they were arrogant, and they were and some of them are. Some of them are just unhappy people. They're, well, I was going to say D-I-C-K-S, oh, no, I'm not going to spell that out even. Well, I just did. They'll be like, this is a book of profound wisdom. I know you've been searching and wanting to read things, but please, this is a book where you will find much wisdom and intelligence. You go, oh, okay, we'll take it. And it's something like John, or 1 John, or Corinthians, or something like that. And they mean it. They're not being like melodramatic. They're being like, this is because they hold the New Testament as the crown jewel of things. 1 John, I think, is an incredibly mystical book, and I compare it to Slaughterhouse 5. If I knew right where it was, I'd grab it, but because it reads in a cyclical manner. Like you could start off at one point, as long as you read back to that point, it would make perfect sense. I don't suggest doing it the first time. I had a lot of problems with 1 John because I was reading Paul, which is very linear. Wow, 1 John seems a lot shorter than I remember it. The first letter of John. you have to realize that it, because I said, wait, God forgives sin, but then it says you cannot sin and this and that. But you have to realize when it's referring to Christ and that being in Christ, the view of this is you have, since you're tethered to Christ, then you were without sin. But when you do sin, repent of it. But it's like, it's very cyclical, and God is standing outside of time. So there's kind of both views there of well, you don't sin because you're attached to Christ, so you're not the man of sin, but the old man is striving with you. So when you do fall, repent and you'll be fine. You have an advocate in heaven. And it confused the hell out of me because of the way I was looking at it. Again, another folly of the scholasticism that comes with Protestantism. I'm glad I didn't fall so much into it. I saw a lot of the cracks and crookedness and and I don't mean this about Protestant people either. I mean some of them are, but I feel horrible for them that there's no fruit, there's nothing to grasp onto, and it will wear you down because it's you alone, it's you crying into your pillow, or I didn't do that, or talking into the darkness on a dark night, asking to God and wondering what you can do, and you're left with it's kind of like, like a mind fuck, like you're left, your wheels are spinning, and it feels like your neck is almost tightened, like it's stiff. And God says, don't be stiff-necked. It's not like you can do anything with just worship, because you're always worried about idolatry, and you're worried, am I doing this right, or am I being too arrogant, or it almost causes you to be very it's narcissistic, but not it makes you worry. It tries to assure salvation, but when it does something like that, I think the Orthodox and the Catholics are actually more comfortable in their salvation than people who say faith alone, because then you don't see your actions lining up. Like, well, I'm not bearing fruit, or am I bearing fruit? But I was always nice to people before this, so is this a thing of Christianity or my own thing? And I was actually almost convincing myself I can't do any good. I shouldn't even try to do good works, because it's just fake, and it should just come naturally. And even if I want to do good works, I shouldn't do that either, because it should be God doing it through me. So I would intentionally not do good, not try to do, help out or things like that with the poor. I always felt I was failing because I would be, good to my family, which is a horrible thing. Because this is what it ultimately does. It will make you depraved. If you believe you are totally depraved and you struggle with matters of faith, you will become depraved. And you are not depraved. You were born fine. You may have become horribly corrupted, but the image of God is not destroyed in you. If you have any response to the Christian text at all, the image of God is not destroyed in you. For a sociopath or a psychopath, I don't know. Maybe it is. I can't speak for that, but 1 John is a very mystical text, I believe. It's cool, and it's very cyclical, and you might have to read it a couple times. And if you have problems, message me. And if you want to get more than one opinion, your parish priest, your deacon, Lazar, Gambler. Well, I shouldn't do this, but Gambler and Dimitri, I have an Alyosha, because they're brothers in Orthodoxy too. So I'm gonna kind of stick them with it, because I think they're great people to go to. That's just it. So they might be. I might have a punch in the face coming to me later on, but they're nice guys. Jude and Peter have a different kind of mindset, and Hebrews, there's some parts of Hebrews I do struggle with. Timothy, the pastoral epistles like Timothy, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, these are very grounding. Like, people can go off on Paul, but Timothy, 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus are very grounding good texts. I believe they're some of the best of the Pauline corpus. But yeah, you can see the humanity in Mark. You can see the majesty of the history in the Messiah in Luke. You can see the Jewishness in Matthew, and you can see the divinity in John. And the beautiful thing about this is you can see the divinity and the history and the Jewishness in Mark, and you can see the majesty and divinity and humanness and historical trace of the Messiah in Matthew. And in Luke you can find the humanity, the Jewishness, and the divinity. And in John you can find the Jewishness, the humanity, and the history of the Messiah in John. So they all have parts of them, but some of them way heavier than the others. That's why it's so beautiful. They have that four texts, and that's why the Syrian just said, screw it, we're going to make it into one. The Diatessaron was the first, but there were other ones that did that later. So I just wanted to say that about the monastic writings, that these aren't things that you... I think I warn people against, and I know many parish priests do warn us against diving into these very monastic texts, and even the Ladder of Divine Ascent, which in the Orthodox world, after the New Testament, that was the most read book. It was by John Climacus, but what was he? He was a monastic. I know that John Kronstadt, I believe is how you pronounce it, I think he was in the 18th century, and he's a saint. He wrote for the people in the pews. I haven't read a lot of his stuff, but I know people that got help from that, but I can't recommend it since I haven't read it. So if you want to read the Church Fathers, I would start out with the earliest stuff, the Didache and the Letters of Ignatius. Clement is a little long and gets into things. I think Barnabas is something great too, and I think it was written by Barnabas. But also a text that was Jewish, that was read by the Christians, and was found in Qumran in the Hebrew, was the Wisdom of Solomon. Attributed by name to Solomon, but all the writers had always said this was written by the friends of Solomon, or those studying wisdom, who attributed it to Solomon. So it's not even like possibly what 2 Peter could be, where it's just from the school. These people were actually explicit in saying it. And in the Moratorian canon, it says this. In the Moratorian fragment, the writer says this. Athanasius says this. Many writers have said this. And it was in the LXX. So with the monastic writings, no, God isn't the author of confusion, but different people for different states, different times. And you don't want, what's good for the monastic is not what's good for the lay person in the world, and what's good for the lay person in the world is not good for the monastic. Lay people in the world who are married, have sex, have children, you have concerns about the world, and in love and obedience to God, you fulfill your role in your family and in your community. For a monastic, they're devoted to prayer in a different way. I don't doubt that a mother has continual prayer and the love for her children go up as a prayer, as a sweet-smelling incense to God, or a child's obedience to his mother, and out of love and his making his family proud is a form of worship in a very mystical sense. But for the monastic that prays the liturgy and does prayers for their country and does continual prayers and perfects this to pray for the nation and pray for every human being on earth, taking care of kids and having sex is not part of that, and that's not good for them. Just like if you're married with kids, to cloister yourself off and abandon your family is not a good thing. We hear things like this from very eccentric people in the past. Many of the monks and saints might have been crazy or depressed. Does that make them less? Does that mean they're not saints? No. But some of them were eccentric people, and people would flock to them, people with families. People were going to get married and ask them to pray for them and admire them, and there was no contradiction, and there was no, oh, well, you're dirty, you're going to sleep with somebody, or you're going to have children. And I feel that some of the monastics today, some of them that actually come from America, or even some of them coming from the old countries, have this idea that the Stylites or the Desert Fathers would have chastised people for actually living a good life with a family. And I think it's kind of the bitterness of, like, they don't want to be monks, but they think that's their only way to get to heaven. If you look at Lazar, he's a monastic, and he has no bitterness towards family, and does not like the monastics that do that, which is another thing that I had really struggled with the monastics when I found him, and I realized that he had a similar experience with that. Yeah, so it's not touching the ineffable. It can make you, it can shock you, it can be a changing experience, but of driving into insanity, if you saw an angel, right, in its full state with the heavenly hosts, yeah, you would be, it says, greatly terrified in many places in the Bible. Like, people were always basically in blind terror of these beings. If you saw the face of God, you would probably be destroyed. But how is that when you're in Christ? I think it's a different kind of thing, and it's more edifying. But also, angels come in different degrees. You know, there's sometimes where people don't know it's an angel. There's sometimes where it's not even called an angel. It's called the cherubim or the seraphim, which were these fire beings that had 6 wings covering their eyes, soaring aloft, borne on their pinions. I'm almost reciting, borne on their pinions. You know, all the stuff from the liturgy. But yeah, the monastic writings, for the more developed people in Orthodoxy, or the people who are grounded, being baptized, taking the Eucharist, who have these staples, right? I would say that would almost be a prerequisite to go into these things. Remember, early Christians didn't even look at the Bible. They didn't even know what went on in the liturgy. After they said the doors, that was it. That nobody knew what went on. That was before Nicaea. That was what it was like. At least before the legalization in Milan at 313. But especially the monastic writings, which come after hundreds of years of meditation and prayer, and from when St. Anthony went out into the desert, and Moses of Ski, who sat down and was willing to be slaughtered for his belief, or the Stylites who would stand on pillars for days and weeks at a time. These were this is a different age, different development, and I don't doubt that there can be jewels for that, for the laity, that there can be profound things that the laity can get out of that. But and I don't doubt that all of those things work for the people on Monathos. But you take things as they come. You know, it's at first you eat, you know, bread, water, then vegetables, then the meat. Kind of like if you're boxing, right? You spar with partners, and then you get better, you get stronger, you spar with other people, this and that, and then you go to a title fight. You just don't walk into the ring and fight the strongest guy. You get knocked out. We're told to run the race to win, and Paul calls us athletes. You don't go out and race the fastest person on the block. You exercise, you run, and then you race other people and correct your form. You go through as Peter Owen Jones said when he saw these Benedictine monastics, he said, this is the SAS of Christendom. And that's the good monastics are. The good monastics are these special forces units of the church. But take your time. There's no rush, and you could never hear a saying of the Church Fathers in your life, and you could be holier than they are. So peace to you. May God save Serbia and Syria. I hope this clears things up. In the monastic writings, the thing you have to understand is that they're for the monastics, and they're for very seasoned people. So interacting with these things, you have to know that it was for a time and a place, and for most people, they're not in that time and place. And I don't know if I have the ladder of divine ascent, but my old parish priest would always give out, do I have the book? It's like a guide to reading the ladder of divine ascent. 1,000 years ago. That might be very enlightening. I don't know the context of that or the nuances of Chinese or whatever, especially ancient Chinese or any Chinese. You can draw some of the symbols, but that's about it. So it's wisdom for not this world. We're not in that world. If you're locked up, not monasticism, in the Illinois State Correctional Facilities, you will say, well, in here and then in the world, because it is, no. But with that, you kind of have to get into that understanding of what that means, or the relationship with these two things, because they're mystical. Like, a lot of the sayings, you'll be like, what? Like, in the Tao Te Ching, you'll read things and it'll just be like, this isn't anything in there, but it's like, and the tree was there, so he understood, but yet he did not understand. It's like, what does that mean? But if you're a Taoist living in a bamboo forest, you know about, and I know people who've fallen asleep. Somebody said, I sat down with Letter to Divine Ascent, I was going to read it, and I got, bundled up in a, like I put, this warm, like, blanket or something over me, and I sat in this really nice chair, and I had a cup of cocoa, and it was snowing outside, and I was reading. I started to read, and I fell asleep. And I think that's kind of a cool, cute story. The lady was very nice and very short. And she's saying this, I thought it was funny. Like, oh, that's that's cute. She was older than me. It's not like she's hot, okay? Because I know people are like, oh, you said she was cute. So this question was asked of me, and I don't think I answered it correctly. So I have to re-answer it or clarify better. I said God was not the author of confusion. There's not going to be crazy things, or, because somebody asked me, well, is the Desert Fathers, are they kind of dangerous to read, and with, the monastic writings that, you touch the essence of the unknowable, and you go mad, like in some religious traditions? And I said no, and the answer is still no, except with the Desert Fathers.